All right, do me a favor. Dim your screen just a bit. Lean in and picture the glow of your monitor in a completely dark room. Welcome to today's explainer. You know, we spend literally hours of our lives just staring into this digital abyss, trusting the information that stares right back at us. But within the deep, tangled corners of the web, there are stories that refuse to just stay confined to the screen. We're talking about myths that have mutated, evolved, and, in some really unsettling cases, completely bled into the physical world.
God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. That chilling warning was actually posted on an anonymous forum back in 2019. It was describing an inescapable dimension just out of bounds of our own reality. And the crazy thing? It was written with the absolute, unquestionable certainty of a terrifying fact.
Or, hey, consider a mysterious arcade cabinet from 1981. People said it caused amnesia, seizures, night terrors, hallucinations, and even sudden disappearances. Just picture it. Dark cabinets silently collecting data before being spirited away in the dead of night by men in black.
So it really makes you wonder, right? What if the internet's darkest nightmares were entirely real? Today, we are unpacking the data, the academic research, and the history to discover how our darkest digital fictions are actually shaping our physical reality.
Okay, let's dive into this by defining exactly what we're dealing with here. You've likely heard the term creepypasta. It was born from copypasta. You know, those blocks of text people used to just copy and paste across early message boards. But these aren't just your standard ghost stories. Researchers and folklorists tell us that these are literally the modern digital age equivalent of human folklore. They use first-person narrators, they weave in plausible, true information, and they tap directly into our deep cultural anxieties.
And here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Folklorist Jeff Tolbert calls this phenomenon reverse ostension. So instead of passing down an ancient myth from generation to generation, collective communities of internet users are inventing these narratives completely from scratch. It's like a giant puzzle. They crowdsource the fear. They build the monster together, piece by piece, transforming isolated thrill-seeking into a massive, shared cultural exchange.
And you know what? Academia takes this stuff incredibly seriously. Places like the Journal of American Folklore, University Studies, and institutional archives now track these stories as potent evidence of the human condition. They aren't just spooky internet tales. They're a mirror reflecting our modern anxieties about technology, isolation, and a lack of control.
Case File 01, the Polybius Arcade Cabinet. Let's start our first investigation by stepping back into the neon-lit, arcade-filled days of 1981, suburban Portland, Oregon. The legend is Polybius. It was supposedly an abstract, geometric arcade game that was dangerously addictive and operated as a psychoactive government experiment.
But let's separate fact from fiction here. The myth claims this was a mind control device, heavily monitored by men in black. The reality? Well, it's basically a massive game of historical telephone. In 1981, a Portland teenager actually did collapse from a migraine after playing the arcade game Tempest. And around the exact same time, actual FBI agents raided multiple Portland arcades. But they definitely weren't collecting mind control data. Actually, they were investigating arcade owners who were illegally converting machines into gambling devices.
Let's move on and see how this actually builds into a full-blown legend. You have those mundane coincidences back in 1981, but the name Polybius, that doesn't even appear until 1998 on a website called coinop.org, and it was complete with a totally fabricated date and a fake screenshot. By 2003, the gaming magazine GamePro published an article on it, which launched it straight into the mainstream. Polybius is the ultimate example of reverse ostentation, just taking real-world puzzle pieces and retroactively building a conspiracy that never even existed.
Case File 02, no clipping into the Backrooms. Fast forward to 2019, and we enter an entirely different kind of terror: liminal spaces. Specifically, we're talking about an eerie, yellow-tinted maze of empty office space known as the Backrooms. And the lore says you get there by no clipping, basically glitching out of reality like a character breaking through a wall in a video game. 600 million. That's a staggering number, right? Well, that is the fictional square mileage of the Backrooms. Nothing but the stink of moist carpet, humming fluorescent lights, and randomly segmented empty rooms. For a generation raised entirely online, this is a masterful representation of the very real fear of profound isolation and algorithmic emptiness. But, you know, the internet is relentless at finding the truth.
For years, the origin of that deeply unsettling photo was a complete mystery. But in May 2024, a dedicated community of digital sleuths used the Wayback Machine to uncover the reality. And there was no way anyone saw this coming. That terrifying, infinite dimension, it was actually just a photo taken in 2002 during a totally mundane renovation of a furniture store that was turning into a hobby town in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. A literal empty room, given a terrifying life by collective imagination.
Case File 03, the Slender Man. Now, things are going to take a darker turn here, because imagination isn't always harmless. Our third case file takes us to the darkest corner of digital folklore. This is where the barrier between the safety of the screen and the physical world violently breaks down.
Let's look at the entity's profile. Created by forum user Eric Knudsen under the name Victor Surge, Slender Man is unnaturally tall, has a featureless white face, wears a sharp black suit, and stalks children. What makes this particular entity so uniquely terrifying is how the community crowdsourced his traits over time. They added the static interference on cameras, the so-called slender sickness, those branching tendrils. He was literally a blank slate for the internet to project its absolute worst fears onto.
So, this tracks a pretty devastating evolution. In June 2009, it was just a simple Photoshop contest, completely harmless. Over the next 5 years, the mythos expanded across wikis and massive YouTube series like Marble Hornets. But then, we hit May 2014. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls lured their friend into the woods and stabbed her 19 times. They claim they did it to become proxies for the Slender Man. Fiction had completely weaponized into fatal reality. And scholars are absolutely fascinated by the psychological weight of this. Experts like Professor Shira Chess at the University of Georgia have analyzed this extensively. They point out that Slender Man functions exactly like ancient fairy folklore, otherworldly beings that kidnap children from the woods. But because he was born in the digital age, the metaphor just hits differently. He represents our modern helplessness, that creeping feeling of being watched by anonymous forces we absolutely cannot control.
So what does this all mean? The crucial takeaway here is that the monster isn't real, but the psychological impact absolutely is. Whether it's the tragic violence in Waukesha or the way the myth blended with local lore to trigger a real panic during an epidemic of crises on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 2015, we have to recognize something important. When a belief becomes real to the viewer, the consequences become very real for society.
The ultimate myth, dead internet theory. This brings us to our final case file today. It's a myth that isn't about monsters hiding in the woods, but about the very infrastructure we're using right now. This is the ultimate myth because it bridges the gap between paranoid fiction and unsettling reality in a way no other piece of digital folklore ever has.
Proponents of this theory claim the internet straight up died around 2016. The idea first surfaced on fringe image boards like WizardChan and Agora Road in early 2021, claiming humanity was basically no longer online. By September 2021, mainstream outlets like The Atlantic were writing about it. And the core claim, most of the internet is completely fake, displaced by automated bots.
So, the conspiracy says the US government and state actors are secretly coordinating these bots to manipulate human perception and consumer behavior. But if we actually strip away the tinfoil hat for a second, we find an academically verified, leaner version of the theory. And the reality is heavily documented. Our digital spaces are being flooded with AI-generated slop. We're seeing massive amounts of link rot, where old, human-made sites just vanish forever, and algorithms are constantly prioritizing cheap engagement over actual human authenticity.
Now, what's really interesting about this point is what linguist Adam Alexic said in a 2025 interview with Time. He put it perfectly. Used to be a lunatic fringe conspiracy theory, but it's looking a lot more real. Experts who once dismissed this whole thing as a complete joke are now legitimately sounding the alarm. With a massive explosion of generative AI and large language models, the fear of human-authored content being entirely drowned out, that's no longer just a myth.
When we actually look at the symptoms of a dying web, it's pretty sobering. We are seeing bot traffic reaching near parity with actual human traffic. We've got algorithms dictating exactly what we read, and AI models mindlessly scraping content only to regurgitate it for other AI models. The dead internet theory functions precisely like a creepypasta. But instead of preying on our fear of the dark, it preys on our very real fear of technological irrelevance.
The Gutenberg parenthesis closes, a return to the campfire. Okay, to make sense of all this, researchers point to a fascinating concept called the closing of the Gutenberg parenthesis.
Basically, for a few hundred years since the printing press, our stories were locked in discrete, permanent media, books, newspapers. But the internet has returned us to our primal roots. We are right back around the digital campfire. We're telling tales, adapting them, changing them, and sharing them. We are collectively shaping our culture through these digital myths.
From a phantom arcade cabinet in Oregon to the endless yellow walls of Oshkosh to a faceless figure stalking the woods, these aren't just spooky stories. They are the artifacts of a deeply connected, highly anxious human race just trying to understand the massive machine we've built. Which leaves us with one final, haunting question to think about. If our digital fears are so incredibly powerful that they are actively shaping our physical reality, is the human internet already dead, or are we just learning to tell better ghost stories? Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.